As part of a global news investigation into rail service, we're looking at just how reliable it is. Trains have connected Canada for more than a century, but in the last few decades, a number of factors have started causing costly delays. Tonight, Megan Robinson looks at what's happening on and off the tracks.
There was a time when the fastest way from Toronto to Vancouver was by train, with railway stations at the heart of many Canadian cities. The timetables from 70 years ago show the cross-country trip has become 14 hours slower, if you're lucky.
You're sitting there going, what is going on here?
One trip in January 2018 from Toronto to Vancouver was 43 hours behind schedule. None of the westbound Canadian trains were on time that month, with an average delay of 29 hours.
We haven't invested in train travel, especially for people rather than goods.
CN owns the tracks Canada's only passenger rail service uses for the Canadian, the Toronto to Vancouver route, and says its other customers pay more than $250 billion to ship products like oil, grain, and timber every year. Passenger trains don't get priority on the track.
And those are the money trains. They leave Halifax, they go to Vancouver and get off of their way.
While Via Rail trains wait, the delays have cost the company millions in expenses, like overtime for their employees who deliver bad news to passengers.
I'm 55, I retired, lucky me, but I could have gone another 10 years. But I cannot sustain this I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry constantly.
About 10 years ago, the Canadian was on time 84% of the time in both directions. But then, things started to go downhill. Just 8% of trains on the route were on time in 2017, with a small increase the following year.
I have to plan to lose a day because of how much I have to pad my schedule with all the delays that I can encounter. So one of the last trips I took, I just expected a 12-hour delay. That was just normal.
In a recent report, Via Rail says the situation is a serious embarrassment, and the performance of the Canadian should serve as the canary in a coal mine for what will happen sooner or later on its busiest routes in Ontario and Quebec if no action is taken. But Via Rail isn't just worried about delays. It also warned without improvements, it can no longer offer viable passenger rail services, which could help reduce traffic and pollution from cars and planes.
If we want train to be a real viable alternative for people to get around, we have to make sure that there's lots of ways to live near the train, there's lots of places to go that are connected to the train.
The federal government says it's reviewing the situation. CN spent billions of dollars in recent years to reduce congestion on tracks, but passenger delays persist.
I can understand a breakdown, I can understand irregularities, but for us to be held up on the tracks like that, given zero priority, you felt like you were being shuffled around like cattle.
Some train advocates have been calling for a new law that would give Via Rail more power and make it easier to punish companies causing delays. But the federal government tells us they're not considering it. Megan Robinson, Global News, Toronto.